everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Thank you all for joining us. This has been an incredibly popular Craft Bytes, so we're very excited to have you all here, and I'm looking forward to seeing a few more people join us as we get started. And today we're going to be looking at, as I know you all know already, we're going to be looking at unpacking the tension between product and engineering teams. So if this is your first time here at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a bit about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. There are now over 5,000 community members, most of whom are here at this talk, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching and mentoring groups, curated Slack community, and events like this one. And we'd like to say a huge thanks to our partner, Lohika, for making these Bytes events possible. So, hello and welcome. I'm Zoe Cunningham. I'm a director at Softwire, which is a bespoke software development agency. I've worked at Softwire for over 20 years. So I'm a little bit of a lifer. I started as a coder and then I did various different things, and now I'm a director, and I love to go out and get involved with events like this. And I also host our Softwire podcast called Softwire Tech Talks, where we cover a really large range of topics. So we have some quite technical podcasts. I just did a great chat with Christy Wilson about her new book about continuous delivery. So she gets quite technical in that book. But we also talk to CTOs and engineering leaders about the skills you need for leading a team and for building products and all of the good stuff that we're going to also be talking about today, for which I'm joined by Sergey Soloviov, who is the Director of Engineering at Lohika. And can I ask you to tell us a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Zoe. Hi, everyone. Yeah, like Zoe said, I'm here on behalf of Lohika. Lohika is a company that provides high caliber engineering resources for companies that need to scale rapidly. My role there is to be the director of engineering, which essentially means that I work quite closely with our clients to help them integrate those engineering teams that we provide into their own organization so that they look and feel as an extension of those organizations. Previously, and if I think to the very beginning, I've been working with software teams for nearly 20 years in various capacities. A lot of this time was spent in delivery management, but I also have product management experience. So I've kind of seen both sides. I've even held a role for about 4 years at a startup to lead both organizations, product and engineering. So I guess I know a thing or two about the topic.
And also, thanks, Sergey. Also joining us is Sarah Hale, who is the Director of Engineering at Unity Technologies. So, Sarah, can I ask you to do a quick intro?
Sure. So hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. So I'm currently Director of Engineering for GameOps, building Unity gaming services. So Unity is probably most known for the engine, but I actually work on the services side. So we are building a range of products to help games and developers build, manage, and operate their live games. So we basically are building everything that allows the developers to spend their time focused on the creative aspects of building a game rather than the mechanics. I started my career on the IC path, so I went up to principal engineer, and then I switched to the management track. I've since been doing that for a few years, and I've been leading teams ranging from about 20 people, and most recently scaled my team from 20 to over 100. So that's been pretty interesting. And I'm really interested in this topic because I firmly believe that product and engineering need to have a really strong partnership in order to be truly successful in creating customer outcomes that are actually valuable. But I also think it's really easy for people to say, yeah, just have a healthy tension or collaborate well. And it's actually much harder to achieve that. And then aside from that, I like synchronized swimming, and apparently raising chickens was my lockdown hobby. But I'm excited to talk about products and engineering today.
Not chickens.
Not chickens. But if all goes wrong, I've got chickens as a backup.
Brilliant. So if anyone would like to ask a question, you can ask questions at any time with the Ask a Question link, which is at the bottom of the screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask just a kind of few introductory questions to set the scene, and then I'm going to go straight to all of the questions from the audience. So please do start adding questions now if you have things you want to know. So we're going to talk about unpacking the tension between product and engineering teams. And I feel like this, it's almost like we don't need to do an introduction because everyone knows what this is, right? Everyone's seen this. Everyone's got experiences with it.
So I think there's like quite a few different perspectives that we could talk from. So I think one of the things that makes this topic so well known but hard to tackle is the fact that you could tackle it or think about it from different angles. So when I was inside a team, observing the tensions between product managers and engineering managers, maybe have a different perspective. Now I've moved through engineering management and had to create strong collaboration and partners with product people, again, brings a different angle. And I think also it changes depending if you're in a small startup versus a scaling company versus a really large company. So I think it's one of those classic ones where it's easy to go, yes, we want tension, but what does that mean?
Yeah, from my perspective, my interpretation of the topic, at least, is that, yeah, indeed, when creating software products, we have cross-functional teams working on them. Product engineering are often seen as almost like opposing forces in this process that kind of pull in their own direction each. And I guess it is a multidimensional topic, I agree with Sarah, but in very simplistic terms, it is this kind of dilemma between product wanting to ship more and sooner and engineering wanting to invest more time in making the thing better. So in essence, that's probably what it comes down to for me.
Super interesting.
But
sorry,
I guess,
yeah.
Sorry, I was like, so it is, but I think often we sort of categorize it as like engineering have one perspective and they're very focused on making things technically perfect and all these engineering troubles, and then product, they only think about it from the customer perspective, just wanting to get features shipped really quickly. And actually, I think if we take that step back, the majority of the time, both engineering and product are still trying to deliver on that same goal of delivering delightful customer experiences. They're just coming from it from different perspectives. And I think that's partly what causes a lot of the friction and tension. But I think in order to be successful, we have to recognize that although we have different perspectives, we respect each other's viewpoints of where we're coming from, but recognize that we're ultimately trying to achieve the same goal.
So as someone who is quite conflict avoidant, and I like everyone to get on and everyone to have a nice time, we're talking about tension here, and that makes me kind of feel tense. I don't want that in the workplace. So is the best thing, can we eradicate this tension? Is that going to lead to the right outcomes?
I'm not sure it's one possible, and two, I don't think it should be desirable even. Tension is ultimately good as long as it's a healthy tension. So yes, indeed, it's a cross-functional team and people are coming at the same problem from different angles. It's a good thing, similar to how a competition is a good thing for the market ultimately. Like, yes, people are trying to outperform themselves, but in the end, the consumer wins. So something similar is true in this team dynamic as well, where tension should be a way of finding a sweet spot between these different perspectives.
And I think you raise an interesting point. I think it's because we categorize it as, we expect there to be tension between product and engineering, it can sort of muster up feelings that we must have conflict. And I don't think that's necessarily what we're striving for. So effectively, we're looking for, that collaboration, a strong partnership. And that doesn't necessarily mean conflict. You want to be able to have a trusting relationship with your counterpart or with your other disciplines, so that you can deeply discuss a topic and raise different perspectives and ultimately sort of drive towards the right outcome. But I think when we categorize or equate tension with conflict, that's where we end up often striving or creating an environment where unhealthy tension rises to the top, because I see or I have seen in sort of some instances where people go, oh, I'm getting on with product, that's not right, I'm supposed to have tension. And so like, manufacture conflict because they're like, it's too easy, I just agreed with what they said and that's wrong. And so I think, again, that's kind of why this whole area is so hard, because sometimes a signal that you're in alignment with your product partner really easily can be seen as a negative, whereas it might actually be okay, but not always. So it's complex.
It is cool, and it makes a really interesting topic then, right?
Yes.
And you both words, I think, both use the words. I think Sergey used the words healthy tension, and Sarah, you used the words unhealthy tension. So, can we unpack a bit? What do we mean by that? What is healthy tension, and what is unhealthy tension?
I think it's easier to spot, I guess, the unhealthy because it feels dysfunctional. And I think things that I would be looking for would be like siloed thinking, kind of going, that's someone else's problem, or lots of sort of out to win or be right. Those are kind of the things where it feels like we're not we're doing all the opposite parts of a strong collaboration. And I think healthy tension is where you are sort of grounded in respect for each other, empathy for each other's positions and the customer, and are really sort of anchored towards discussing and validating the problem you're trying to solve and that North Star, rather than competing against each other and different disciplines.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're almost talking about like you're not trying to win.
Yeah.
You're kind of got different perspectives, but you're not trying to beat them and win. You're trying to like both win, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think in places where I think if the accountability model is around sort of one side winning, I think as soon as you start talking about sides, it's not going well.
True. Yeah. I think for me, it's about remembering again, been mentioned before, but once again, that it's a whole team, one team with the same goal. And therefore, the difference for me between a healthy tension and unhealthy tension is if you have a tension that helps you make progress continuously in a meaningful way, that's a healthy one. If it hinders your progress, then you're on the other side.
Cool. I think that's the key bit, is that meaningful progress and actually having meaning inside the discussions that you're having.
Yeah, and not having the same discussion over and over again.
Yes.
So I guess listening comes into it as well then, right? And understanding and
for sure.
Yeah, not just putting your perspective, but actually taking on board another perspective and incorporating it and finding new ways to do things.
Yeah, and I think being willing to admit that you might not have it right, or you might actually need to do something different or compromise because of a valid perspective that you just hadn't thought about. I think it's really messy, and I think one of the other sort of really challenging bits of this is that there's a lot of gray areas between what's an engineering's problem versus what's a product problem or responsibility, and effectively the responsibilities, they do overlap, and so that's again where you need to make sure that you're striving for a collaboration and strong partnership, because rather than sort of siloed thinking.
I just wanted to agree. Yes, I think people from the engineering side, people from the product side, they sort of care about slightly different things, or they feel strongly, or they wrestle with slightly different things, and they're simply different components of this one equation. They do overlap, but they're not exactly identical. So that's the key.
But I think sometimes we oversimplify that, because I definitely agree. But sometimes we go, so product bring the why and, the what we're doing. And then engineering, they just, tell you whether it's, feasible to implement or do. And I think, if you put yourself in those strict buckets of going, I'm an engineer, so I can't think about, what the customer might like, or I don't need to understand why the customer might quit, then actually that sort of diverges your path and then puts yourself into, that's somebody else's problem type thinking. So I think we have to be careful when, or at least when trying to lead engineering teams, to actually make sure that everything and all their pitches and discussions or sort of ideas are all rooted in, well, what customer outcome are we trying to achieve and what customer value are we bringing? And I think that helps bring both sides together, coming from their different perspective. But if you sort of think, that's product's job, that they only come up with the what and the why, then we start going to dangerous waters.
Super interesting. So I love to take questions from the audience, because then I know that we're talking about what people are here to find out about. So I'm going to start taking some questions from the audience now. Please do keep posting questions if you have them. What often happens is that several come up at once, some overlap, so we can answer some of them together, if that makes sense. But let's start with top question, silence. So we've been talking about healthy tension, unhealthy tension, but what if there's nothing? What if teams just aren't talking to each other?
That's a pickle. So I think that would be a sign that you're in the unhealthy place, or the bad place. And so I think for that, there's a few different techniques that you could do to try and understand, well, why is that happening? This is possibly me sort of deferring to my more sort of engineering way of solving problems. So I'd be like, I want to understand the root cause, maybe do a bit of a 5 whys on what's happening here, and understand like why we're in this place where there is no trust, there isn't talking, and try and unpack that a little bit. I think most of the times it's often sort of rooted in a misunderstanding of what we should be expecting from each other, that sort of goes from a tiny little nugget into a massive sort of rift, and sort of it's often a simple bit of miscommunication, but that wasn't course correct at the time, and then turns into a really big thing. I don't know. What do you think, Sergey?
The moment I heard this question, I kind of imagined a room with a group of people in a sprint break perspective, that had just sat in their chairs and not saying anything. I don't know if the question is about that kind of situation or something different, but I've never personally had this. I've only heard about this as a hypothetical scenario. But I think in this situation or a similar one, all it takes is probably just having one person in that same room who understands what a good dynamic in the team looks like, because they would be able to pick very specific examples in these past 2 weeks and ask a really good question that provokes a discussion. So like product engineering are kind of playing tennis or ping ball, and the ball needs to go back and forth, back and forth. If it doesn't go like fast enough or lands precisely enough, or if it doesn't travel, then it's a reason to ask a provocative question, and that will kind of make people open up or share an opinion, or something like this. So I'd look for triggers.
It's one of the things that's kind of always scared me most in a leadership role, is when people don't tell you things. So I'm always super skeptical of surveys, because I'm like, look, people who are not engaging, they're not filling in a survey to tell you that. They're just not engaging. And obviously Ishmael, who's asked the question, that's the driving force behind the question, right? If people are not talking, there's stuff it's not that everything's perfect and happy, there's stuff that's not being said. And I suppose the things that occur to me of why I wouldn't, which again, this is theoretical because it's never actually happened to me, but the reasons I wouldn't talk are if I was scared of repercussions, or if I thought there was no point. And I think that this is when you have this adversarial, you get to the point of like, I have told you so many times and you still don't listen. I think that is kind of back to what we were discussing before, people having different perspectives and having to understand the, I don't want to say other side,
Yeah, because that doesn't help us. That gets us into healthy bits.
Exactly.
I think that's really key. I think as soon as like if you did have feedback and then it goes silent, that's a really strong signal that something's really wrong. And then it's worth, I guess, reflecting on, well, like what's happened to get to that point. Because I agree. I think it's probably people have got to that point of frustration where they're like, I've told you a million times and nothing changes. And I think it can be a bit easy to go, but my survey says I'm great. You know,
five stars out of 5 answered by one person.
Yeah, exactly, one person. It's not a very strong sample size.
All right, so let's move on. Another good detailed question. So one of the key challenges I have always found is the tension between the need for certainty of timescales by product to enable prioritization decisions and the desire not to commit to timescales by engineering, due to basically not knowing how long it's going to take, to abbreviate that, perhaps with some engineering sympathy on my side. And so how do you feel about balancing those needs? This is a key question. If we can answer this question, we're done.
I think it's really hard. I think there's a million different ways you could approach it. I think the way you approach it probably does change depending on context, situation, stage of company, all that kind of stuff. But one thing we're doing at Unity that I've not done in previous places, but I find really I guess refreshing, is that we follow the concept of engineering sets dates. And the way that we set dates is that we use the P50 process. So engineering is given a piece, they digest what's asked of them, trying to uncover your unknowns as much as possible, or sort of applying a bit of risk, but effectively you're giving a date that you are 50% confident in. But the expectation is that that date will change as you progress through the project, and your responsibility in engineering is to make sure you keep your product and other partners informed, so that we have sort of a view of of roughly how long things are going to take. There's an expectation that we might have got it wrong. We do evaluations on how good we are at coming up with our P50s, reflect back of why was our P50 so wildly off base, and try and, take that learning forward. But I found it's actually been really helpful at sort of taking de-risking the fear of going, here's a date from engineering, because there's no expectation that you're committed to it in stone. And then from the product perspective, it enables them to think, okay, that's actually far out, or it's small, and this is how I'm going to prioritize it, because I've got some certainty, or enough certainty to actually understand when things are going to land, so I can do my bits. So I found that it does take a lot of discipline, but it's actually reduced, I guess, a lot of that tension compared to some previous places that I've worked. So I'd encourage people to give that a go.
Very cool.
I can call out a few kind of principles or approaches here. I think for me, the first thing, probably the starting point, is to establish the capacity of the organization. Sorry, actually, I'll start with by saying everyone needs to be setting expectations. That is never going away. Product people, or even top management in the company, will always want to know when things can happen. It's not only because they want to have a peace of mind, it's because they need to be making commitments around it. Mm-hmm. If an organization is preparing to ship a release, if it's a set of new features, they need to be marketed, and that's a whole different group of people coordinating that. So things need to get aligned at some point. So expectation setting is important, but then you need to have some preconditions to be able to do that. Predictability happens when you know what is your realistic bandwidth as an organization. Is your capacity stable? And are you able to estimate work accurately enough to be able to make forecasts that people can rely on? So stabilizing that kind of velocity of your engineering team, or teams, plural, is one of the early steps to make. And then product people that want to know due dates so badly, they can actually do something to help that as well, which is providing clarity of the objective. So, engineering may be better positioned to estimate the work and provide those kind of milestones. But the work needs to be clear for them to do that. It needs to be clear enough. This is the job of product people, for them to work with stakeholders, customers, whoever it might be, to arrive at these clear enough sweet spot in requirements so that the other steps can happen afterwards.
Yeah, super interesting. So I think the more this is a deep question actually, because the more you uncover it, there's actually the part I skipped over about engineering can get better estimates the longer they spend estimating, right up to you can have 100% accurate estimates if I do my estimating exercise called actually building it, right? So for a certain amount of time, you can know the exact accuracy, and then the less time you spend estimating, the less accurate your estimate is going to be. So I was going to ask you about that, but actually, Sergey, you've just thrown up something else, that detailing the requirements takes a lot of work by product. And actually, if you're going to detail a very exact requirement, only to be told that actually it's not feasible for timescales or cost or whatever, you kind of don't feel like doing that either. I don't think there's an answer, but have either of you got wisdom to share on this?
Well, I think that just goes to the top point of the fact that, like, in order to be successful in creating customer outcomes, you need to have that strong product and engineering collaboration. And neither team or discipline want to spend time, like, doing wasted work. They want to make sure that they're spending energy in meaningful work. And I don't think there is any easy answers to any of the stuff we've been talking about here, but I think it just roots the fact that you need to have that trusting relationship with your partner so that you spend time doing just enough of all of these activities in order to move forward. Because otherwise we'd end up just going, it's too hard, I'll just not do anything.
There is one other trick that people could try and apply in dealing with estimation accuracy. A part of it is trying to make a good enough guess how long a particular piece of work is supposed to take. Another part is actually following through, because what happens basically is people get a question, how long is it going to take? They provide that best guess, and that sets an expectation. And it's their job next is to meet that expectation. That requires flexibility. And this goes equally for both product and engineering. As long as they both are clear of the real objective, that customer outcome that they're after, they can find a meaningful flexibility, that they can cut corners along the way to meet the expectation, but in a good way, not in a negative way. Cut the right corners, if you like, in order to actually achieve. And I think it's both things. Knowing how to estimate accurately enough, and then having the flexibility to actually make it happen.
Yeah. And whether that's cutting corners or even building slack in, right? So that you can cut that.
But I think you've just sort of made me think of something. Another sort of source of tension is it's when engineering get frustrated that they feel like they're getting pressure to cut corners because you want to deliver quicker, and then the frustration of, well, why don't they understand that actually we're building on an incredibly fragile base and it's not going to scale and it's all going to fall down, and I need to do an architecture, and then being unable to come up with a persuasive argument as to why they should spend time not building this customer facing feature, but actually like getting the house in order, undoing some of these cut corners which were appropriate at the time, but death by 1,000 cuts is sort of screaming in my ear. And I think like trying to make sure that like engineering create effective or persuasive arguments to go, I need time to spend on this, can be a common source of where that friction arises, and potentially why it leads to the the silence in the room that we were hypothetically talking about earlier.
Right, we've got loads of questions. So much as I feel like all of them we could talk about forever, let's try and maybe jump through a few a little bit more quickly. So, all right, how about some tactics to engage engineering with the user problem? So we've kind of talked about how it's a good thing to have engineering engage with the user problem and not pushing that over the fence to product. So yeah, how can we do it?
Walk the path is one thing that comes to mind. It's tricky because on one hand, everyone likes the notion of getting engineers closer to customers, but on the other hand, no one likes dedicating time to making that a reality. So at some point, it comes down to like believing that this is what it takes. And to be more specific, I'm talking about things like having engineers spending some time on customer support, for example, firsthand, or at least like watching over the shoulder of customer support people. What are the situations that they're having to deal with? So it creates exposure to real use cases and real friction points. And I think it just helps build that empathy towards the end user.
I think that real part is the key. I think where I've seen this go wrong is when you're trying to manufacture customer empathy. So it's sort of just going, oh, just do this because customers will want it. I think it needs to be grounded in some form of like realness. So I would, I guess, echo what Sergey's saying here. I found it effective to have engineers as part of their on-call rota, or maybe like a green flag system during the week. Like they answer customer support tickets, or look at the forums, or jump on customer calls and make it a on call or the green flag time, not just be cleaning up the bugs and sort of dealing with incidents or being the first responder, but also using that as an avenue to spend a week gaining some customer empathy. I think balance is probably key, as with all things, but I definitely think it helps bring a bit of understanding of the other person's perspective.
I think there's something that's a little bit about human beings respond to what they're measured on and told is good and not good, right? So if you, as an engineer, you've only ever had people say, that's not high enough quality, that's not robust enough, that's not resilient enough, that's what you're going to be focusing on. If when you're submitting work, someone's going, whoa, you did not understand the user there, go back and do it again. I mean, maybe it's just me, that was like my worst, go back and do, oh my God, again. Then that makes a difference. All right, should we move on? I like this next question because it's what we were just talking about, but accumulating / paying off technical debt or investing in longer term payoff R&D, which do you do? No, I'm only joking. How do you make that decision though? How do you convince stakeholders, which is what we were talking about before? You need to make that decision and you need to convince stakeholders that you've got it right.
So I think there's probably like a million different ways that you potentially could approach this. I think it's similar to what we were just speaking about there, grounding it in sort of real, tangible examples. So trying to create an effective argument that meets the needs of what the other person really cares about. So if I'm trying to advocate as to why I need to spend time re-architecting the whole system, it's kind of like, well, okay, so what value are we getting from this? Which is and it could be things like measurable sort of velocity improvements for developer. And, that is a persuasive argument to product if they understand that it's, short-term like pain for them right now, focusing on this, but it means that we'll be able to deliver our features to customers quicker later. But it's effectively just anchoring it into a customer problem, either directly or indirectly, I think works. And then you've got your classic things such as like the 60-20-20 principle. So 60% of your time or your sprint should be focused on features, 20% run the business, 20% on technical debt. I think when we use things or frameworks like that as guidelines, it works really well. I think as soon as you try and turn that into strict rules, that's where I see it fall down. And partly because with processes like that, you never get that full time to really focus on, actually, we have built this whole thing on quicksand and we need to spend dedicated time making this robust and resilient now that we've got, suddenly popular product. What you build for a small scale versus large scale isn't necessarily the same approach. That's my thoughts.
I've also seen people do different things depending on their situation. Some organizations, because of their size, are fortunate enough they can actually afford carving out a part of their capacity and removing that capacity away from the influence of product people, like dedicate 1 or 2 engineers for a period of time to tackling some of the tech debt issues, and that can help if you're able to do it. In some other cases, you know how engineering teams like expected to continuously sprint. No one can actually sprint continuously for several years in a row. So some organizations I've seen, they divide this up, this process, this timeline, and alternate between like high intensity performance periods with low intensity, more kind of free form, shorter periods. And in those periods, engineers actually have a real opportunity to catch up on stuff, refactor something, whatever is causing friction in their own day-to-day work, tackle that. So things like that can happen. But one other thing that I prefer to do in my previous life is to work with engineering to actually help them frame the technical enablers or other tasks of that nature as business benefits. Because in this case, if you're able to do that, then it becomes defendable. They can easily justify it, and product people can see the benefit first of all, and they can take it to other people, convince others, and so on. None of this works 100% of the time, but some kind of a mixed approach can probably help.
Yeah, definitely. I think adapting is also key, but I think your point about grounding it in business value is really important. I think that's probably one of the most persuasive arguments, but it also sort of helps with that litmus test of am I doing this just because I want things to be neat and technically correct because it makes me happy, or you're actually doing it to progress and move things forward.
Although never forget that developer happiness is a business benefit.
Developer happiness is certainly super important, but I don't think I want to have another argument about that not being 100% restful according to the spec. It's like good enough,
All right. So I'm going to keep going in the highest votes because you've still got loads of questions. So I'll go most popular question order. So when product is building the roadmap / next initiatives, how soon should they involve engineering in the discussion? Great question.
I guess I would default to as early as seems sensible, which is a bit of a wishy-washy answer. So I think involving early makes sense, but would you involve the whole team on day one when you're sort of in that ideation stage? Possibly not. But I do think that there's definitely I guess, opportunity to bring the entire cross-functional team. I know we're really focused on just product and engineering, but we should expand it to, our other functions like sales or marketing and things like that at ideation stage to hear different perspectives, different voices. Product then can sort of, take it away and understand, well, what does feel like the area to really explore. And then when you've got a pitch or an idea, then you can start bringing more people in as you go. But I think there's been a few comments as well talking about the fact that, there's no point bringing engineering in if we don't have any understanding of what we're trying to achieve. So that's where I think product and engineering managers having that strong partnership, they can sort of ideate, sort of work out something has legs, give high level, that's going to be really difficult versus actually it might not be. And then once it's a little bit more solid, then you can bring it to the teams to do their, estimation, actually working out how we do this, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess it depends, would be my TLDR for that.
If I try to answer this in one sentence, I'd probably say involvement of engineering should never stop. But that's not a very helpful answer. In more tangible terms, I have a kind of a certain way of thinking about product roadmaps and how they become better specified engineering tasks. In my view, a product roadmap should the items on the product roadmap should be customer problems. So obviously, you're building a product that addresses a single overarching customer challenge, but that then breaks down into more granular ones along the user journey or for different segments and so on and so forth. And that's what the roadmap should consist of. You have those little chunks that you're trying to prioritize and put in a sequential order. And then there's a process that converts a customer problem into a solution. So when you begin to do that, which should be a recurring process, then you need an involvement from all functions, including engineering.
Great answer. Great answer. And also, it's kind of both of you are saying in different ways. It's a little bit. You kind of start with a little bit of engagement and build up the engagement as you're more sure of what's going on. It's almost like, it makes me think of weaving things together, like you're gradually weaving. That's a terrible analogy. Okay, let's have a question. This is a nice, simple to say, but perhaps harder to achieve question. What are the best ways to build trust between, in this case, product teams and engineering teams, but I suspect some of the answers will be applicable to human beings in general.
I think that's a really big question, and I probably could answer that in a bunch of different ways, thinking about the different perspectives. Is it like building trust between teams or between like your product manager and your engineering manager in those partnerships? I think having like that shared goal, a common goal that people can unite in, sort of helps establish the fact that we want to make sure that we're not creating silos or divisions between teams. So if it's clear about like effectively you're trying to achieve something together, I think that helps establish the fact that we want a trusting like relationship between the different sides. But I think trust, it's a really challenging one. I think if I think back to when I've struggled to have that trusting relationship with my product counterpart, it's sort of often is rooted in like a misunderstanding or of what each other's sort of motivators are as to why are they making those decisions, and maybe it's been a bit unclear. And I think the other times I've found challenges is when my bosses and their bosses have different expectations, so are asking for different things of each of us. And so then when we're trying to come together, we're talking at cross purposes because we're ultimately trying to deliver different goals. So I think that anchors me back into having a sort of a common shared goal and understanding, and trying to make sure that you really believe that the other person, their motivators are actually to help you both achieve this shared goal is important. But trust is a challenging one. And I would suspect that during the pandemic, when so many people have had to sort of build relationships, but purely remotely with no opportunity to meet people in person, has probably made this a lot harder. I don't think, as with all these things, there's a simple answer to building trust. I think, if you go into a partnership like striving for a trustful relationship and assuming that there will be trust, it sort of sets you up for success. But you need to, I guess, say things and then, deliver or like do what you say. And then that trust builds up over time.
I think it's another of those things that are very easy to explain, but very hard to actually make a reality. I agree with Sarah when she says that, when she emphasizes the understanding and binding to the same goal. That's certainly one of the preconditions, because if the objectives are misaligned, then no matter what you do, you're going to struggle. This may be easier for small organizations to kind of keep people on the same page. It gets harder, less trivial when organization becomes big. Like 50 people, 100 people, 200 people, because there's a large volume of organization. So even when management aims to communicate what the objectives are, they naturally focus on one domain. In those kind of circumstances, what helps is showing people how things linked together. So how engineering objectives, for example, help progress the overall broader business objectives? How do they contribute to larger goals? Making that relationship clear and verbalizing it is very good. And then once you have this kind of foundation, I think it comes down to basic human principles of building trust, like be transparent and keep promises over and over and over and over.
And the other one I would just add for something to just go and start trying is trust first. There's something about if you trust other people and you kind of put your trust in them, then that can be reciprocated, and it's and at least you fix one side of the relationship, even if it isn't. So we've got a question about any approaches that are helpful for setting a shared goal, which ties into what we were just talking about, that's saying having the shared goal builds trust. Any particular approaches for the shared goal? I mean, something that occurred to me earlier is we were talking about we're building one product, right? You're not going to have a product team's product and an engineering team's product. there's only one.
Well, I wanted to pick up on this point that I was just talking about. If I were to guess, product people would probably be more focused on slightly wider, broader, less defined business objectives, because at the end of the day, they're spending their time figuring out how to commercialize the technology they have. And compared to that, engineering objectives would be a lot more specific. But drawing lines between them is something that can help. As well as helping different teams come up with objectives that feed into each other. I think this is one of the reasons why the OKR framework emerged at some point, because that's exactly what helps to align objectives of different departments in a large organization. You start from the top, define the direction clearly, and then you start breaking it down. That's how you keep them aligned. Obviously, again, easier said than done, but that's the mechanism behind it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's potentially where a source of some of the tension might arise, though, in the fact that I've certainly seen it where product think they've established a really clear vision and North Star, and then are frustrated that they don't understand why engineering are complaining about the fact that they don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it, and just sort of point to a deck or an artifact that they've created, going, "Ta-da! It's my vision. It makes sense." So I think that's to what you said there. It's really easy to say this is what we should strive for, but I think in reality it can be quite difficult. In terms of how to create that sort of shared understanding, I think there's a few different things. I highly recommend that all my teams have very frequent check-ins or daily chats with their product person, as in they should be speaking daily about what they're currently doing, but also having that longer lens looking out, so that you're sort of continually sort of validating that you both got that shared understanding, but also it helps you think, maybe we actually want to move over here or evolve our vision or understanding and direction of where we're going. So doing it more sort of informally via mechanisms like that. And then otherwise you can have sort of more traditional brainstorming sessions where, there's a million sort of online whiteboarding tools that help you generate ideas, vote on them, discuss them, make prototypes for the top ones, build it out, all that kind of stuff.
It's another good general principle, isn't it, that if you want people bought into your objectives of any sort, get them involved in making them, not just hand them down as a fait accompli.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think if people feel like they had a voice in saying what we are doing and why we're doing it, I think we ultimately get happier people, which is important, but also stronger customer outcomes, which is ultimately what we're striving for as well.
Brilliant. So thank you very. Oh, do you want to talk, Sergey? Go.
I wanted to add something, because when Sarah said sometimes product people think they've set clear direction, whereas in reality they didn't. That resonated, because that's one of the situations I personally had to solve at one point. And I think the thing to strive for in a situation like this, when people actually try and yet not succeed, is to create supporting structures in their work that are quite practical, utilitarian. So if, as a product manager, for example, you're trying to set a product vision, do not write a 3-page document, because that's really hard to work with, really difficult. You can't use it every single day. Instead, try and package the meaning of your product vision into a single phrase, for instance. When you have that, that can easily take part in your daily conversations, and that's how you get it naturally reinforced over and over again. So that's just one example, but the idea is, again, think of artifacts that you can use in a versatile way, that are very compact, that can create that natural reinforcement.
Yeah, I guess
Great
that's
tip,
one
yeah.
sign of success. Like if you can see that some random person or somebody in the team is just articulated or rapid back, like, you know, the vision that you set out, that's a sign that, you know, you've nailed explaining it well.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. So thank you very much to everyone who's asked a question and everyone who's voted on the questions, because I'm not sure I've ever had the luxury of so many questions to answer on a panel before, and it's really helpful for working out which ones to prioritise. So please do go and have a little final vote on the questions that are left, if yeah, so that we can answer the kind of the top 2 or 3. So the top one at the moment is, I quite like it as a question because it's a little bit of a flip of a question we answered earlier, which was, how do you get engineers interested in the customer journey? Well, how do you get product to care about tech debt and infrastructure, and how to get it prioritized? So we've definitely touched on this before, but I guess perhaps, are there any persuasive arguments you've heard, or any easy ways to link it to the priorities that the product team have?
I think it's really it's an easier way to have a strong argument if you're continually having incidents. So if the product is a bit unstable, I think it becomes easier to get that buy-in from all other functions, because generally it's like, why is your stuff always offline? So I think in some ways it can be easier to sort of create a persuasive argument in those situations. But I think where it's, I guess, more interesting to talk around how to create that persuasive argument or get that buy-in is when it's not so visible to that something's wrong. And so that's where I think grounding it in like what matters to the other person is important. And if you can ground it in why this will indirectly or eventually benefit the customer, that in, you know, the fact that, you know, it is developer velocity will go up, or it will unlock this ability or this, you know, much desired feature that we currently can't do, or it's creating this business value, you know, through a little bit of like indirect hoops. I think that helps. But generally, my advice is to effectively pull up a one-pager. So creating a really simple, straightforward, persuasive argument, which then may have your facts and data and all your really, you know, specific articulations of why it, of course, matters later. But it's just keeping it clear and simple, and being, I guess, empathetic to the other person's desires and needs and their motivations. So how do you help make an argument that is helpful for them progressing their outcomes as well as your own?
I think what I'm going to say may sound like threatening almost. Kind of always use the stick. Always tell your product person that unless this is fixed, it's going to cause trouble. But maybe one way of getting somewhere with this is trying to remove opinions from the argument and kind of reducing it to the laws of physics, because it's really, really difficult to argue with laws of physics. Ultimately, product people need to realize that they work with software. It comes with certain properties, certain things that are true and certain things that aren't. It's just the medium that you work with, and you have to understand, be aware, and kind of respect things that like this is what it takes. Sometimes refactoring has to happen, or sometimes any kind of solution will have its limits in terms of load handling or scalability or whatever it might be. If as an engineer you see that you're approaching those limits, it should not be difficult to approach product people and say, look, this is the current trend, the load is rising. Unless we do something about it, it will result in production incidents or instability for your key clients or whatever it might be. I think it's not that uncommon that product people simply don't realize it. It's not like they don't agree or they're bad people, they're simply unaware. So that's probably a part of the equation. But once again, try to not say, I think we should do this. Try to say, it's necessary because.
That's a great tip in itself, just to phrase it in that way, even though it's uncertain, even though perhaps it's this has a probabilistic outcome. It's not definitely going to bring the server down permanently, but it could happen. Fantastic, thank you so much. I was just going to do a quick scoop for any super high voted questions, but we are literally, well, there's one that's got 4, which is tension arises from the fact that engineers are excluded. And I think that we've covered that, and we are all in agreement. Include your engineers. I think, anyone got any final points to say on that?
No, I would agree. I think it's the collaboration is incredibly important, and you want to establish that. But it comes from the top as well. Ideally, you'd be working in an organization where your execs also think that you need to have strong collaboration between product and engineering, and that just filters down and makes it so much easier. I think if you're trying to change it from the bottom, it becomes a little bit more challenging, but certainly possible.
Work for a good boss. That's your tip to take away today. Thank you so much, Sergey and Sarah, for talking to us today. You can connect with Sarah and Sergey if you want to talk some more about this fantastic topic, and also me as well on the links. And yeah, so thank you very much, Sarah and Sergey. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.